The warm evening breeze swept through the bustling streets of downtown New York, carrying with it the tantalizing aroma of freshly baked sourdough and sizzling ribeye steaks. Mrs. Eleanor Carter stepped out of her sleek black sedan, her silver hair catching the golden glow of the streetlights. At 72, she carried herself with the quiet elegance of a woman who had seen the world and conquered it in her own way. Tonight, she wore a simple navy coat, but around her neck gleamed a diamond pendant, an heirloom so exquisite that only the sharpest eyes would recognize its worth. She had been looking forward to this dinner at Le Jardin for weeks, a rare indulgence in one of the city's most prestigious fine dining establishments. Le Jardin was more than a restaurant, it was an institution. Nestled in a historic building overlooking the Hudson River, its polished mahogany tables, crystal chandeliers, and live violin music painted a picture of timeless luxury. The waitlist stretched months, and its clientele included everyone from Wall Street tycoons to Hollywood A-listers. For Eleanor, this wasn't just a meal, it was a ritual, a chance to savor the fruits of a life well lived. As she approached the grand glass doors, the doorman, a young man with a crisp uniform, offered a polite nod and swung them open. Inside, the air buzzed with the soft hum of conversation, the clink of wine glasses, and the faint strains of Vivaldi from the corner where a violinist played. Eleanor inhaled deeply, letting the scents and sounds wash over her. But as she stepped toward the hostess stand, she felt it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like the first ripple before a storm. The hostess, a nervous-looking girl in her 20s with wide brown eyes, glanced up from her reservation book. Her fingers fidgeted over the pages, and she avoided Eleanor's gaze. Before Eleanor could speak, a sharp voice sliced through the air like a knife. "We don't take walk-ins without reservations." Eleanor turned slowly, her expression calm but her eyes narrowing. Standing before her was a middle-aged woman with blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. Her navy blazer was pristine, and her name tag gleamed under the chandelier light. Martha Reynolds, restaurant manager. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, unfazed. "I'm not a walk-in. I have a reservation under Eleanor Carter." Martha's lips curled into a smirk, her blue eyes glinting with something cold and unspoken. She barely glanced at the phone Eleanor held out, displaying the confirmation email. "There must have been a glitch in the system," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "We're fully booked tonight. No exceptions." Eleanor's brows furrowed, but her voice remained steady. "I confirmed my booking 2 days ago. Perhaps you could check again?" Martha folded her arms, her posture rigid. "I don't need to check. I know my restaurant, and I'm telling you, there's no room." She paused, her gaze raking over Eleanor's modest coat and weathered hands. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable somewhere. Less demanding." The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. A few nearby diners glanced over, their forks pausing mid-bite. Eleanor felt the familiar sting of judgment. She'd faced it before, in boardrooms and backrooms, as a black woman who'd clawed her way up from nothing. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled faintly, a glimmer of steel in her eyes. "I'd like you to check," she repeated, her tone polite but unyielding. Martha's smirk faltered for a split second before hardening again. She snapped her fingers at the security guard, a burly man in a black suit standing near the bar. "Escort this woman out. She's disrupting our guests." The guard hesitated, his eyes flickering between Eleanor's calm demeanor and Martha's icy command. A murmur rippled through the dining room. Some diners averted their eyes, pretending not to notice, while others discreetly raised their phones, the faint glow of screens illuminating their faces. Eleanor didn't move. She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and dialed a number. "Hello, dear," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm having a little trouble at Le Jardin. Could you come here right away?" Martha let out a dry, mocking laugh. "Calling for backup won't change a thing. I can't conjure a table out of thin air." Eleanor slipped the phone back into her purse and met Martha's gaze. "You have no idea what you've just done," she said, her smile widening ever so slightly. The dining room grew quieter, the tension thickening like smoke. The guard shuffled forward, his broad shoulders casting a shadow over Eleanor, but he stopped short when she raised a hand. Not in defiance, but with the quiet authority of someone who knew she held the upper hand. "I'll wait," she said simply, stepping aside to a plush velvet bench near the hostess stand. She sat down, crossed her legs, and folded her hands in her lap, her diamond pendant catching the light with every subtle movement. Martha's face twisted with irritation. "This isn't a waiting room," she snapped. "You're embarrassing yourself, and frankly, you're wasting my time." Eleanor didn't respond. She gazed past Martha, out the floor-to-ceiling windows where the city skyline glittered against the night sky. The violinist in the corner faltered for a moment, missing a note, then quickly recovered. The hostess shifted uncomfortably, her fingers hovering over the reservation book, as if debating whether to intervene. A man in a pinstripe suit at a nearby table leaned toward his companion, a woman dripping in pearls. "She doesn't look like she belongs here," he muttered, loud enough for Eleanor to hear. The woman smirked, sipping her martini. Probably thought she could sneak in. Eleanor's lips twitched, but she said nothing. She'd heard worse over the decades. Whispers about her skin, her roots, her audacity to rise above her station. She'd built a life proving them wrong, brick by brick, and tonight would be no different. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching the tension tighter. Martha paced near the hostess stand, barking orders at the staff. "Get back to work," she hissed at a waiter who'd lingered too long, watching the scene unfold. The young hostess finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. Miss Reynolds, I could double-check the system." "No," Martha cut her off, her eyes flashing. "I've worked here 10 years. I know every name on that list. She's not on it." The hostess shrank back, clutching the book to her chest. The guard, still hovering nearby, shifted his weight, clearly unsure whether to act. Then, the grand entrance doors swung open with a soft whoosh, and every head in the room turned. A tall man strode in, his presence commanding the space without effort. He wore a tailored black suit, his dark hair flecked with silver, and his sharp green eyes swept the room with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. The staff snapped to attention. Waiters straightened their spines. The bartender fumbled a glass, and even the violinist's bow trembled slightly. But Martha, oblivious, marched toward him with her usual arrogance. "Sir, I'm terribly sorry," she said, her voice syrupy with false politeness. "We're fully booked tonight. No available tables." The man stopped, his gaze locking onto Eleanor for a brief moment. She gave him a subtle nod, and he turned back to Martha. "I'm not here for a table," he said, his tone calm but edged with steel. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a sleek black business card, and placed it on the hostess stand. "I'm Jonathan Carter. I own Le Jardin." A stunned silence swallowed the room. The clatter of silverware ceased. The man in the pinstripe suit choked on his wine, and his companion's martini glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. Martha's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Jonathan ignored her, turning to the hostess. "Check the system. Where's my mother's reservation?" The girl fumbled with the book, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. It's here, sir," she stammered, pointing to a line on the screen. "Eleanor Carter, 7:30 p.m., private table, Hudson View, confirmed 2 days ago." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He didn't look at Martha, but his voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Miss Reynolds, you're dismissed, effective immediately. Hand over your name tag and leave." Martha's eyes widened, her composure crumbling. "Mr. Carter, I didn't know." She didn't look. She stopped, realizing every word dug her deeper. The guard stepped forward, this time with purpose, and Martha shrank back. With shaking hands, She unpinned her name tag and dropped it onto the stand, the metal clinking against the wood. She turned and stumbled toward the exit, her heels clicking unevenly as she fled. The room erupted into whispers. A woman in a red dress clapped softly, and a few others joined in, their applause growing into a quiet wave. The man in the pinstriped suit sank lower in his chair, avoiding Eleanor's gaze. Jonathan crossed the room and knelt beside his mother, his stern expression softening. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have been here sooner." Eleanor patted his hand. "You arrived right on time, dear." But the story didn't end there. As the hostess led Eleanor and Jonathan to the private dining area, a secluded nook with a panoramic view of the Hudson, a middle-aged woman in a chef's coat emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Her eyes widened when she saw Eleanor. "Mrs. Carter?" she gasped, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Eleanor Carter? The Eleanor Carter?" Eleanor tilted her head, amused. "I suppose so." The chef, whose name tag read Lila Monroe, executive chef, turned to the staff, her voice rising with excitement. "Do you all know who this is? This is the woman who founded Le Jardin. She opened the first location in Harlem 40 years ago, with nothing but a dream and a recipe for cornbread." A collective gasp rippled through the room. The waiters froze. The bartender dropped a bottle of bourbon, mercifully unopened, and the violinist stopped playing entirely, staring at Eleanor in awe. Jonathan chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mom, I told you not to test the staff like this anymore." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "Oh, I didn't plan this one, but it's good to know who's minding the house I built." The diners erupted into chatter, Bones now openly recording the scene. The man in the pinstripe suit slunk out, his companion trailing behind him. The chef rushed forward, clasping Eleanor's hands. "I trained under your recipes, ma'am. Your cornbread, it's still on the menu, you know. I owe my career to you." Eleanor squeezed her hands back. "Then keep making it better, Lila. That's all I ask." As the staff scrambled to set up the private table, a waiter approached, his voice meek. "Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter, your meal is on the house. Please accept our deepest apologies." Jonathan waved him off. "Make sure it's perfect, that's apology enough." Eleanor settled into her chair, the city skyline sprawling before her like a tapestry of light. The table was soon laden with dishes, seared scallops, truffle risotto, and a small plate of golden cornbread, its edges crisp and buttery. Jonathan sat across from her, loosening his tie with a sigh. "You could have warned me," he said, a playful edge to his voice. "I nearly fired half the staff on the way over." Eleanor laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled the space. "You handled it beautifully, Jonathan, just like I taught you." He shook his head, smiling. "You're impossible, you know that? Showing up unannounced, dressed like you just came from the grocery store, testing everyone. What if I hadn't been in the city?" "Then I'd have handled it myself," she said, cutting into the cornbread. "I built this place from the ground up, fought landlords, banks, and critics who said a black woman couldn't run a fine dining empire. One rude manager wasn't going to ruin my night." Jonathan raised his glass of wine. "To you, Mom, the toughest woman I know." She clinked her glass against his. "And to you, for keeping the dream alive." As they ate, the restaurant hummed with a new energy. Word of Eleanor's identity spread like wildfire, and by the time dessert, a decadent chocolate soufflé, arrived, a small crowd of staff had gathered near the kitchen, whispering about the legend in their midst. Outside, Martha's silhouette faded into the night, a cautionary tale already taking shape. Eleanor leaned back, gazing out at the shimmering river. She unlocked her phone and typed a message, her fingers steady and sure. "Never let anyone tell you that you don't belong. You might just be the one who built the room they're standing in." She hit send, knowing it would reach her granddaughter, a fiery young woman studying law at Columbia. The ripple of justice that had swept through Le Jardin tonight would spread further, through stories, through lessons, through the quiet power of a woman who refused to be erased. Eleanor took a final sip of wine, savoring its richness. "Tastes better when it's served with a side of justice," she murmured, and Jonathan laughed. The violinist struck up a new tune, bright and triumphant, and the city lights danced on.